Now to the tough part, as far as I'm concerned, my record in law school. I made a mistake. When I got to law school, and you will be given the entire record, I did not have this record. I had sent away to Syracuse for the record. They had sent me the record, but they did not send me the material that's the most pertinent, not because they kept it from me. It was on my record. There's a course called Legal Methods. And it's the course, some of you are lawyers. Every freshman in law school, at least at Syracuse, has to write a legal memoranda the first 6 weeks they're at school. And the purpose, I believe, if I recall correctly from 23 years ago, is in fact to teach you how to use the library and to write a legal brief. And what you do is you're divided into groups, and there were 30 people started off in my class. We ended up graduating, I think, 86 or 87. I graduated 76 out of that bunch. The fact of the matter is that we started off and they divided us into groups. And what they did is, what you would do is, I would check your paper, you would check my paper, and she would check your paper. And part of the mark was also the ability to critique and show you could really rip apart the other person's paper. I hope I didn't say anything wrong. I'll wait if you need that. The stills are dead? Well, I'll jump up and down that or something. So I wrote a paper. And what I did through that paper, I went and got a law review article. The law review article had within the law review article a number of citations and cases. I took the cases out of the law review article and the footnotes out of the law review article, and I thought what I was doing honestly was the right way to do it, and the representation about what the case said from the law review article. And then at the end of the law review article, when they set out and said, this is what all this means, I wrote that in my paper, what the conclusion of the law review article, and I footnoted it. Now, folks, the footnote, I'm footnoting a law review article in a 15-page paper where I use 5 pages of the 15 pages out of the law review, which refer to the cases. And then as the conclusion comes up, I cite the conclusion, footnote 21, law review article, what page it occurs at the end of this citation. I was wrong, but I was not malevolent in any way. And so this young fella, who apparently somebody's found, some other campaign's found, great, I knew he'll already be around somewhere one day, found, and he went as a good young fella, and he said, hey, professor, this guy didn't do it the right way. Brought it to the professor brought it to the dean said, explain yourself, Biden. And I wrote, which you will get, it's in my record here, I wrote a 2-page letter explaining why I had been so stupid, but that I did not intentionally move to mislead anybody. I didn't. To this day, I didn't. I know I didn't. I did not. I was mistaken, but I was not in any way malevolent. So I asked in the bottom of the letter, I said, Dean, let me speak to the whole faculty and make my case. In a sense, my first trial. And I walked in and I made my case. The dean told me afterwards, later that afternoon, that in fact what they were going to do is make me take an F in the course for this semester if I made it through the remainder of the school year and we're still in good standing the second year, not related to anything ethical or unethical, just made it through in terms of my grades, because they told us when we got there they're going to flunk 40 of us out. If I made it through, then I'd have to repeat the course, the legal writing course. And I'd repeat that course the next fall, and whatever grade I got in that course would be my grade, and they'd strike the F from my transcript. You'll have my transcript also. And you'll see a line from the official transcript. Through that, I went from an F to a B. I often think what would happen if I hadn't gotten that B, I would have been 78 in my class. But at any rate. Now, that's the whole of it. That's it. What you have, what I'll give you, and then the dean wrote a letter. The dean who presided over the matter wrote a memorandum of the file that I'd never seen till yesterday, which said, let me quote the letter, but I'm sure you'll all go through it very closely anyway, as you should. I'm not being facetious. You should. It says the faculty, it says Syracuse University College of Law, December 1, 1965. Hard to believe it's 23 years ago. Almost 23. It says subject, Biden, Joseph R., memorandum, it has written up here. It says, quote, the faculty in a meeting on December 1st, 1965 found that in his required paper in the course on legal methods, Mr. Biden used 5 pages of published law review articles, of 8 published law review articles without quotation or citation. That's precisely right. The 5 pages worth I did not cite. The 6th page I did cite where they had the conclusion. And then he says that the faculty recommended to the dean that his grade in the course be recorded as F, and that this minute be added to his file, and that if he continues in the law school next year, he'll take the course again, or be precise. Make this a required course of, If he continues in law school next year, he must take the required course in legal methods. In conference with Mr. Biden the same day, the dean explained the action of the faculty and the fact that Mr. Biden would have to consider the probable outcome of his application to a character committee to certify for his fitness to practice law. The dean informed Mr. Biden that if his record in law school was clear, from this point on, the dean would be willing to state to his character committee his opinion that this matter should not stand in the way of his admission. Then upon graduation, the dean who succeeded the deceased dean, it was Dean Karras, Dean Miller, wrote to the Bar Committee in Delaware, Dear Mr. Canby, Joseph R. Biden, Jr. was awarded a J.D. degree from this College of Law on June 2, 1968. He was in regular attendance, not always, while pursuing his studies of law at Syracuse University. Mr. Biden is a gentleman of high moral character. His record reflects nothing whatsoever of a derogatory nature, and there is nothing to indicate the slightest question about his integrity, industry, or ability. August 1st, 1968, 20 years ago. So, ladies and gentlemen, I made a mistake. Little did I know I'd be standing before the whole world acknowledging the fact that I didn't know how to write a legal memorandum, and it costing me as much as it's costing me. But I've learned one thing since I've decided to run for president, and I assume one thing. Everything about me is going to come out in the public record. And I've done some dumb things, and I'll do dumb things again. I've done some dumb things as a senator, done some dumb things as a lawyer. But what I haven't done, and I suggest to you, is a matter of my character. Go ask anyone with whom I ever practiced law, opponent or friend. Ask any of my colleagues, anyone, opponent or friend. Ask anyone whom I've had a relationship with. And if they tell you Joe Biden is not as straight as an arrow, I'll be very surprised. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've been dumb. I did something very stupid 23 years ago. That's it. Fire away.
Biden,
yes.
Questions have arisen about what you've done more recently than 23 years ago. You say that were all those references to Hubert Humphrey's speeches, to Robert Kennedy's speeches, to John Kennedy's speeches, were all those inadvertent references put in by speechwriters or by Joe Biden?
I don't know what all you're talking about. The one I know about, for example, I have, and everyone else, there are certain generic quotes people have used matter of fact, I got a call from a guy who's a friend of mine. I think none of you believe it, but Jesse Jackson. And Jesse called me to tell me, he said, look, Joe, I used the Hubert Humphrey quote about the dawn of life, the whatever, and he said I didn't attribute it and I didn't know it. The fact of the matter is, every time that I have been aware that it has been someone else's quote, I have used it. As a matter of fact, the criticism of me by the press, with good reason, has been in part in this campaign that I quote too many people, that I quote Kennedy all the time, I quote King all the time, I quote Humphrey all the time. So what I'm saying to you is that if and when I've ever quoted anyone without saying this is their quote, it's either because, as I say in some speeches, listen, can you hear the voices? Let the word go forth. I don't quote anybody, everybody knows that. When I haven't attributed, it's either because, in fact, it's been clearly known by everyone what it is, or I honestly did not know I was quoting somebody else. And I want to say one other thing. It's ironic to me, and I guess it's all comes with the territory. But I don't know anybody else other than Reverend Jackson who's had as much original material as I have had in my speeches. And the irony is I'm standing here talking about whether or not my use of someone else's quotes are the essence of who I am and what I say and what I stand for. As honest as I can answer your question.
Do you feel you're able to control, to put it in the vernacular, your mouth, that you can think before you talk?
Well, I've been in this business for 15 years. I let my record of 15 years versus the transgression that you're referring to stand, and you all can make that judgment. I feel very capable of using my mouth in sync with my mind.
Senator, in relation to the law school incident, the memo from the dean stated December 1st of your freshman year. When was the paper?
Oh, yeah, I'll give you. Paper was actually written and handed in October the 18th.
And when did school start, sir?
I don't remember. September. I mean, it was like 6 weeks into school. I honestly, but you have. I'll give you every one of them, including the paper. I mean, a paper that's marked up, the whole works. I didn't know they had the paper. I'm serious. I'm not being smart. I didn't know that. I didn't think they. Anyway.
Senator, you say that this issue has been raised by your opponents.
Well,
do you think that the other
I was
campaigns
told.
are out to get you for some reason, or is this
I don't have any opinion. The reason I mention that is I was told by it was in print in the Wilmington newspaper where one campaign was asked whether or not they did this, and they said no, another campaign did this, and there was a reference, I'm told, in a Des Moines paper saying that one of the campaigns did this. Look, I'm a big boy. I've been in politics for 15 years. This is not my style. If they want to do it this way, so be it, but it's not my style. I am not very good. I don't know. You all will find that out, I'm confident.
Senator, a lot of Democratic leaders are saying that the real question is not whether you borrowed some textual material, but whether your vision, which is supposedly one of your strong points, is real or whether it's borrowed. And they cite not only these examples, but the fact that you seek often to identify yourselves with the Kennedys and Martin Luther King and the activism of the 60s, even though your record is somewhat at odds with that you were not greatly involved in civil rights, you were for the war, and you even thought of running for office as a Republican. How do you answer those people?
No, well, first of all, we've talked about this a lot, you and I. That's not accurate, by the way. I mean, that's kind of a... Anyway, let me answer the question. I don't know anybody who has run for public office, who has tried to communicate a great idea, who hasn't gone back and used other great ideas to make those motions. I mean, I recall Robert Kennedy quoting, he did not think up, if I recall, the notion that some men ask, you know? That wasn't his, but it conveyed what he meant. It didn't mean he associated himself. When I quote Edmund Burke in these hearings, I'm not quoting Edmund Burke because I agree with his conservative views, but because the point he's making allows me to communicate in eloquent language the point that I want to make on that specific instance, number one. So, I mean, I don't quite understand this. But second point I'd like to make is that, that with regard to my almost running as a Republican, that is not correct. What is correct is that when I got back from law school, my Democratic Party in the state of Delaware had less than an enlightened view on race. The race issue meant a lot to me. I could not bring myself to register as a Democrat. And you used to be you had to be 21 back in those days to register. And so I came back to Delaware and I registered as a decline, independent, because I couldn't bring myself to associate with Richard Nixon and what I didn't mean in a personal sense, but what he stood for, that philosophy. And I wasn't comfortable with the Democratic Party, which at that time was more an old Southern Democratic Party. And so I registered independent. In the meantime, I worked for a law firm, clerked for a law firm that was a mainstream blue blood Republican law firm. And they tried to get me to join the Young Republicans. One day I'm sitting there and they asked me they always had the Young Republicans party at their office, Christmas party. And I'm a low man in the totem pole, so I had to go out and get the stuff for the party, for the senior partner. And the next thing you know, they asked me whether I'd consider getting involved and hold office in the Young Republicans. I said, I'm not a Republican. I don't want to be a Republican. And another instance that happened is friends of mine came to me and said, Bill Roth is not going to run. He was my next-door neighbor. He's going to run for the Senate. Why don't you run for the Congress as a Republican? I said, I don't want to run for Congress as a Republican. I don't want to run for Congress. And so that's, this stuff about I was a Republican. Now, lastly, with regard to the 60s. During the 60s, I was, in fact, very concerned about the civil rights movement. I was not an activist. I worked at an all-black swimming pool in the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. I was involved. In what they were thinking, what they were feeling. I was involved, but I was not out marching. I was not down in Selma. I was not anywhere else. I was a suburbanite kid who got a dose of exposure to what was happening to black Americans when I, in my own city, worked there, one of the only white employee, as the only white lifeguard in this 13 or 14 lifeguards, to find out that many of these guys lived in that city their whole life, a small city, and never knew a white man. It was a revelation to me, and it appalled me. And I was 29 when I ran for the Senate, folks. Other people were marching, carrying banners. I was down here voting against the war. I came down here at 29 years old. So, the war was still on. So this notion that I wasn't involved, that I supported the war, I was not out. I am not, as you probably all figured out about me. I don't like dirty campaigns. I am not culturally one of those guys who likes to, I don't fit very well with, I'm not a joiner. I don't go out, I was out of sync with. By the time the war movement was at its peak, when I was at Syracuse, I was married. I was in law school. I wore sport coats. I was not part of that. I'm serious. What y'all don't seem to understand is some of you. I think you understand it. I don't think you're really being, I won't characterize it. But, there was a 4-year period there, folks. There's light years. When I was on the college campus, those of you who go back with me, 1961 to 65, Vietnam was like Nicaragua is now. We all said that's kind of stupid, but it's going to end. But you don't see many people marching on campuses. Go up to my son's campus in Philadelphia, or go down south, or go out west. It's nothing like the anti-war movement. That's about where Vietnam was in 1963, and 64, and 65. So I find y'all going back and saying, well, where were you, Senator Biden? At the time, I think it's bizarre. And then when the movement did catch up, I was a 23-year-old guy, married. And look, you're looking at a middle-class guy. I am who I am. I'm not big on flak jackets and tie-dye shirts and, that's not me. I'm serious. But that's the period. So anyway, I want to get this straight, man, because I keep getting asked this all the time, and I'm not going to get this many in your room again until I'm inaugurated. The